Amanda.
Good morning, Simon.
So who are our guests this week on the podcast?
So this week we have James Wilson from St James Place, a former comedian. No doubt he will enlighten us as we go on. And David Welsh. Well. Oh yeah, boy band member. And David Welsh, barrister at Axiom Advocates, who will chat to us about
tax and trust and dazzlers with tales of cases.
Yeah, great stuff. So James, please either tell us a joke first or just something else about yourself.
Well, I suppose I'll keep the jokes to a minimum. I don't think you can ever be a former comedian, Amanda. I think it's probably something that is an ongoing thing as and when. But
it stays with you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, who knows? But I am a comedian, boy band member, as Simon said, chartered accountant and financial planner. So quite a diverse sort of four interests there. But no, currently I am a financial planner where with St James's Place, as you said at the beginning, looking to help people in as many ways as we can. But generally, we help plan for the future, manage their tax bill, and take them all the way to and through retirement to make sure that they don't spend all their money.
Okay.
Is your client base mainly UK based or international? I think we spoke last year with a client who was moving back to Ireland. Then you had some kind of mechanism where it was sent tax with some kind of scheme or.
Yeah. So I'm a UK tax specialist. So what that means is that the vast majority of my clients are in the UK, and all of my clients I met when they were in the UK. Occasionally, as Simon has alluded to, they move abroad, be it Singapore, Ireland, whatever, and there is a very nice tax treaty between the UK and Ireland. If you are an Irish national moving home, there are tremendous tax advantages to do that. So we put someone who Simon introduced us to in touch with the relevant people for that, and essentially means you can take all your wealth back to Ireland without any tax at all.
Is that similar with Singapore?
So Singapore is different, I suppose. You know, people. The only reason I mentioned Singapore is I spoke to a client this morning, who's moved to Singapore, and I suppose the tax treatment or the tax rules state that when they're in the UK, we can give them advice, obviously, and when they move, we can't because they're in a different tax jurisdiction, but we can continue to manage their investments for them. So plenty of people these days move abroad for work, obviously not at the moment, but whenever we come out of this, they will be able to. And it means that if you have an existing advisor or existing relationship, then that relationship can continue. It's just that no new business can be done, if you're in a different tax code, because it doesn't quite work from a local level. The most extreme example of that is clients that move to America, where the IRS have absolutely no regard whatsoever for any of our tax structures here. So people moving to America, it is a slightly more drastic measures need to be taken, but again, we're there to help them through that.
And are you talking about permanent moves or just sort of interim moves that somebody might go for 2-5 years and
good question. Good question. It's generally we're talking about permanent moves, in that if it's an interim move like a secondment or whatever, generally that is deemed by the UK and the other tax authority as exactly that, just a temporary thing. Whereas if a client moves permanently, then that's when the measures need to be taken.
Okay. So again, any investment income that arises, say if you were in Singapore for 2 or 3 years, that's still going to be taxed as normal under your UK income, and you can manage that. Can you can continue to?
Yeah, it would be rare. It would be quite rare that clients are taking income and moving to Singapore at the same time. In that, generally in the UK, what the good roadmap is to build up an asset base from which to draw when you retire, and it's quite unlikely with the people that I work with that they'll need income from the investments they have with me. Now, occasionally they might need a lump sum for a car or a house or a new roof or whatever it may be, but actually obviously with long-term investment strategy is to leave things as they are as much as we can to benefit from compound interest and whatever else. So Generally, people who move abroad, and in fact, always people who move abroad, wouldn't be drawing income anyway. But any income arising from a property or whatever would be taxed, on worldwide income.
Right.
Because we've got quite a few clients who are Irish now, and some are moving wholly back to Ireland. Some are kind of keeping a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
Is there like a halfway house for any kind of planning you can do?
Yeah, I mean, halfway house is more difficult, obviously, because we're dealing with two tax jurisdictions. I think the tax benefit of moving to Ireland is obviously from the Irish government's point of view. If you move all your assets there and spend your money there, then they're happy to give you that tax benefit to do that. Again, we don't generally advise to do a halfway house. If you were doing a halfway house, it would be likely that the prevailing tax rates would be the case. So being an English taxpayer or UK taxpayer moving to Ireland, is likely that you would still be deemed a UK taxpayer on doing that, but it would it's always applicable on a case by case basis and depending on the various rules that are in place at the time.
And what would you say is your typical client?
So a typical client for me is twofold, I suppose. One is at the beginning of my career, coming into the industry as I was when I was 30, which was only 28 years younger than the average age. Means that you tend to meet younger people who you connect with much easier. And so I have a tranche of younger clients sort of in their 30s and 40s. More recently, I've been working with people closer to retirement, because I suppose, again, people in the UK are generally have two things: cash and property. Now, as in your what we call the accumulation phase, when you're building your asset base, when you're investing into this and that, actually, although financial advice does provably add value to a client's life, actually you can go along quite merrily and not really look for or be attracted to a financial advisor until you think, well, hang on a minute, how am I going to actually use all these assets to form an income and derive an income for the rest of my life? So I suppose for the last 3-4 years, I've been working with people close to or at retirement to help them analyze their predicted cash flow. So using some cash flow tools and some quite conservative assumptions to make sure that we can form an income for them that will last them for the rest of their life. And we generally project up to about age 100, even though it's unlikely that many of them will get there. My job is to be as conservative as I can be with that, in terms of longevity and in terms of the workability of the cash flow, to make sure that they get to age 100 still with plenty of cash left, which obviously can be passed to future generations at any stage. So my job is very much that. And so that's the typical client, sort of 45, 50, 55, has a decent asset base, but isn't sure what to do with it, or how best to use it to derive a tax efficient income.
So old people like me.
I'll do it. You're not that old, Simon.
Oh, I don't know. It's his birthday on Sunday.
Yeah, yes. Okay, cool. I suppose I have to ask you. I think you told me before, but it was during an 8-hour lunch.
Right.
This boy band story.
Yeah, so it was a bit of fun, really, that has kind of stayed with me. So at my university, there was a tradition of every few years, some people getting together to raise some money for charity, and every 5 years it was a boy band versus a girl band. So over a roast chicken on a Saturday evening, my flatmates and I decided that we'd form the boy band and invite some girls we knew who were considerably better singers than us to form a girl band. So thinking nothing of it, my very efficient flatmate the next morning when I arose said that he'd booked the venue, he'd booked a choreographer, he'd booked a promoter, and we were trying to sell out the much loved but now defunct Hammersmith Palais in London. And again, before we knew it, there we were on stage in front of just over 1,000 people, singing our covers of various high quality boy band songs. So yeah, it was quite a journey. And then we played out the last night of our university career. We did a gig there. Then we entered Battle of the Bands at Edinburgh, which was a chastening experience when you're up against proper musicians who actually live and breathe this stuff, rather than four chancers trying to sing a few covers. So yeah, it was fun while it lasted, and there's always sort of calls for. We were called Port Out, Starboard Home, and there's always clamour for us to get back together. And I can see it happening in 2021 as a sort of celebration of the end of COVID. So watch this space.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Well, thank you for that, James. It's
Not
really good. David, over to you. So obviously, I know you do a bit of work with Andrew Thornell QC, who we work with closely, but you're based in Edinburgh, in Axiom Advocates. Please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so that's right. I'm an advocate up in Scotland, so the Scottish equivalent of a barrister, and actually I'm a pupil barrister in England with Andrew. That's how Andrew and I work together a lot. So I'll be a fully fledged barrister sometime early in a couple of months' time. I think I lose track of the timescales of these things. But as is the way up in Scotland, you can't go straight to the bar. You have to be a solicitor first. So I was a private client solicitor for a good few years, doing tax and trusts work with high net worth individuals, which is what kind of led to a continuation of that once I moved across to the bar. So it's a little bit unusual at the Scottish bar for someone to come with a tax and trusts background. There aren't too many tax lawyers at the Scottish bar. It's still unfortunately the way that most of that stuff, because most of it is UK wide, a lot of it still stays south of the border. So we're doing what we can to change that around. So yes, I do. My principal work is tax and trust stuff, mainly still private client work. Although because of the nature of tax disputes, it tends to spread its wings a little bit, and you get dragged into weird VAT things that you had no intention of getting dragged into. So it's I suppose the best way to describe it is that I probably spend half my time still doing advisory stuff like I did when I was a solicitor, principally kind of inheritance tax stuff, estate planning work, the kind of traditional private client planning, and then the rest of the time I spend doing a mixture of tax and trust dispute stuff and just general litigation alongside that. So.
Are these disputes between beneficiaries or trustees and beneficiaries, or is it quite a broad range of disputes?
It probably covers the whole gamut. I think probably the thing you don't see as much is disputes between trustees themselves. What you tend to find is either a beneficiary isn't happy with the trustees, or an income beneficiary and a capital beneficiary isn't happy with the balance that has been struck by the trustees between how the trust assets are being managed and that kind of usual stuff, or the usual when the trustees do get involved, it's normally because they haven't been given some power that they ought to have been given first time round, and they're a little confused about what they're supposed to do in the circumstances. They feel a little bit kind of deadlocked, and then you get the courts to intervene and give them powers that they probably should have had in the first place.
So poor trust drafting initially.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, we had a client last year. The trust deed it wasn't really a trust deed as such. It was designed purely to mitigate income tax as a tax scheme in effect. But when, of course, they stopped using the trust, we went and saw tax counsel or QC, and really it was not really fit for purpose. It was so badly drafted. And in the end, because there was a company that was linked to the planning was no longer there, it in effect made the people who paid the money into the scheme in the first place not beneficiaries. So it all became a little bit of a disaster, but that's a different story.
I think there's a lot of, and I'm sure everyone on here has seen it before, where kind of banks and institutions will use a pro forma trust deed and just kind of fill in the blanks, and very often what that doesn't do, and the problem that arises in Scotland, is that they will use a pro forma that's designed for people in England and Wales, and it doesn't quite translate into Scotland, and it creates all sorts of problems. Or there's one I've just been instructed in where, and this happens also a lot, where someone has left a life interest of a property to somebody, but not left any endowment to look after the repairs to the property, and there's just no money floating around, and then what you have to do is either convince the life renter, as we call them in Scotland, to give up the life rent or to move into a different property, or try and get some power implied by the court. It all becomes a little bit messy. And again, it's just if some more thought was put in at the initial stages as to the consequences of it all, you would like to think it would avoid that happening in future.
I don't think that's particular to trust drafting though, or I mean, I think that there's a common misconception sometimes amongst our clients, I'm sure amongst lots of people's clients, that you can just literally fill in a form, and therefore some clients will sometimes ask us for a templated document so that they can just roll it out, I guess to keep their fees down and their costs down. But as you're rightly pointing out, the actual cause and effect of that is a massive increase in fees when the document isn't actually tailored for the circumstances that they need.
Exactly, and trust litigation it just eats through the trust assets like nobody's business, and the end result is usually that nobody is left with anything, and so trying to avoid that stuff as much as possible is how I try anyway.
Isn't that the premise of Bleak House, isn't it? Jardin and Jardin, they just basically argue for years and years and years and end up with absolutely nothing.
Because Amanda and I were trustees of a trust last year, which we resigned from because we ended up inundated with emails from the beneficiary. Well, personally, it wasn't even a beneficiary; it was a parent of a beneficiary who just used to harass us on a daily basis with emails. He had no power anyway to request anything. But in the end, I said, you stop doing this, it's racking up costs.
Yeah.
At the end, we resigned in the end, and I said, take it away. There's very little left in the pot. And he was surprised at the end of the day. He said, well, what do you expect? So
just in managing your clients' expectations, David, you know, when they come to you with these disputes, you know, it just seems that they lose a little bit of sight of the fact that they are diminishing any entitlement they have in the first place. So is that do you find with clients that's just they're so dogged about the fact that they feel their position is right? Or litigation fascinates me in that respect, because I just think, can't you just
because I do a mixture of commercial and private client litigation, one of the biggest differences is exactly that. Because in private client litigation, what tends to happen is people come with an element of emotion to it that isn't there in commercial litigation. And so they get entrenched in positions and they don't see the commercial reality of what is happening. And what ends up happening more often than not is they get deeper and deeper entrenched into a position despite the advice that they're being given, rather than just trying to work through the disputes that actually are there. Whereas if you had a commercial dispute, very often all anyone thinks about is how to get out of the dispute with spending as little money as possible. You know, that is the primary goal of commercial litigation. Whereas in private client litigation, you're very often met at a first meeting with the phrase, it's not about the money, it's about the principle. And then your heart sinks a little bit at that, and you're then trying to explain that, albeit the principle is very important. No one's trying to take away from that, but it can't be the only factor that you bear in mind when you're thinking about involving the courts, because involving the courts is not cheap. With the best will in the world, involving the courts is not cheap. Even the most basic dispute is going to eat a substantial amount of any trust asset.
Yeah, because we've got a case at the moment regarding BPR relief, and it's a client who came to us for different advice, really. And his mother passed away a few years ago, and before that, she was a developing property for many years. And then there's a period in the middle where she kind of held on to some properties, and then towards the back end of her life, she became again a developer. And they've got a 1.9 million potential inheritance tax bill. They've agreed the valuation of the shares with the HMRC. They've signed nothing as yet, but they've received no advice from anyone at all. They've just kind of received snippets of emails and maybe a one-page letter. They've never really gone to a barrister, a QC, or someone with some knowledge. And what I'm trying to do now is to convince them to spend a little bit of money now to either understand their situation more fully so they can decide whether to pursue the BPR relief claim or put it to bed and pay the tax. But they seem to be so confused now with so many different people stirring the pot, for a different word. It's just very difficult. But no one spotted this in the first place.
I think that kind of thing happens more often than anyone on this call would like to imagine. You know, it's a bit of a false economy. People don't want to spend the money up front, and you can wholly understand that to get the advice. And what that very often leads to is problems further down the line when something just hasn't been spotted or something hasn't been dealt with at the beginning, and then it becomes much more expensive to try and put it right further down the line. And then you see the other end of the spectrum with that kind of thing. If you look at something like the loan charge and all of the mess that people have been left in with the loan charge, when you know they most of them took advice at the time, but maybe didn't take the most rounded advice at the time, and then all of the rules changed, and then they just seem to get harsher and harsher as the rules go on, and then everyone's just left in a bit of a mess and trying to figure out what to do.
Because I was finding it quite comical, because all of the action group with loan charges, they go to the same barristers for advice that advised the people in the first place who took out the loan charge planning. It's a bit circular. That's a different story, though.
But I think that point of, you know, paying for advice or paying for anything these days is always a bit of a struggle. There's so much data out there, certainly in my industry, which says the earlier you take advice, the wealthier you'll be. I mean, it's pretty much a straight line as that. And it kind of depends on your mindset. There's always people always looking for sort of freebies and trying to sort of cobble together a solution themselves, when actually, you know, they're so far out of their depth that it can lead to real problems. Certainly we find that with inheritance tax stuff, where people generally come to us a little bit too late, and they say, look, you know, there's this kind of liability going on, what can you do? Obviously we can do little bits and bobs, but if you come to me 3 years ago, this issue wouldn't have been there. So yeah, I think that's something that the UK as a whole needs to get better at, in terms of, you know, we have one of the lowest percentages of people that take advice for financial affairs in both in Europe and the world. So it's a very British thing to try to do it oneself and not bother anyone else and do all that. So yeah, I completely sympathise.
Do you think as well it's some of it is because of the value that we place on our stuff as British people? Because I think that certainly the experience I've had in European countries that I've either got connections with or lived in is that, you know, they don't have the attachment to property that we do, or the attachment necessarily to their cars. Maybe they're taxed extraordinarily on cars, so they just kind of chug around in whatever they do. And we seem to, in the UK, attach and will spend a lot of money on our stuff, but things that actually count, like sensible advice, we balk at the, you know, the hourly rate. Yeah, there's somebody that's studied and qualified and taken 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it is, to actually be in the position they're in now. You know, perhaps they balk at the opportunity of having to actually pay somebody for that professional advice as they get into their PCP car.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's a British thing to, because there is no track record, you know, because it's probable that your family didn't take advice in this area, or your friends don't, or whatever. And I think in the UK we're very big borrowers, and we spend a lot of money on stuff we don't need. I mean, you know, an example, I appeared in one ITV's primetime daytime show, Tipping Point. I don't know if any of you seen it. But a friend of mine was applying to go on, so we watched a few episodes, and pretty much everyone that wins, Ben Shepherd comes up and goes, right, what are you going to spend the money on? As I did. And he said, and essentially they just say, yeah, I'm going to spend it on holiday. When you think, well, actually, you've just won 10 grand here. I think as good a holiday as that'll get, definitely there are better things for you to be spending that money on than a holiday. But British people just love going on holiday and spending plenty of money doing it, and other things like cars and whatever. So I think it's twofold. I think there's not enough of a sort of a psyche or a track record of people using professionals like us for that kind of advice. And also we as a country, we very much live for today. Hence the various pension rules have come into place in the last few years, and all sorts of other stuff to help people try to save more than they were before.
Or like Bullseye, to show my age, where it was always a boat.
Who needs a speedboat when you're living in a
Birmingham?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that mindset is also very much sometimes why people, when they're dealing with estate planning stuff, they end up going for things like trusts instead of outright gifts in advance. When you're talking to someone about, just get rid of some of your capital, give it to your children, give it to your grandchildren. It seems to create a kind of nervousness, and sometimes the way to get over that has been, okay, well, put it into a trust for them, and at least you retain some element of control over it, or it tends to make people feel slightly less anxious about divesting themselves of capital, to use a weird phrase, but it is that mindset, exactly as James is talking about, where I think people spend a long time accumulating their capital, accumulating their stuff, and they don't easily take to advice that suggests actually it's probably in your interests not to just hoard it somewhere.
I think that's absolutely right. Coming from my position, where as I said, what we do is we help clients realize that they do have enough money to retire, or they don't, and whichever way around it is. And actually, one of the most important things of that analysis is to say, right, if we get to age 65 and you've got this amount in your estate, you could easily give away 325 grand or whatever it may be, or a gift out of normal expenditure, which is kind of the ultimate, where you give away some money, as Bernie Ecclestone does. He gives his daughters millions and millions every year, which won't be part of the inheritance as his estate, because he's generated that money from Formula One. We won't get into the sort of morals of that, but he's done it, and therefore he can give his daughters the huge amount of money he does, because it's a gift out of normal expenditure, and he can prove he does it, even if it's not every year. It doesn't matter, and it's a provable inheritance tax saver. So again, advice is a huge part in this area, because if you can't work out for yourself, do I have enough money to keep going and live the lifestyle I'm living, then you'll needlessly pay inheritance tax at the end, because you haven't given away that money in your lifetime.
Indeed. Fascinating.
Hmm.
You've been on Tipping Point and a boy band.
Yeah. And I was on a very, very short-lived BBC One quiz called Sudoku. None of you would have seen it. Hosted by Big Eamon Holmes. It was trying to take advantage of the Sudoku craze of the mid 2000s, and we got absolutely obliterated by two accountants who just absolutely wiped the floor with us. But yeah, so I came back for a triumphant return to Tipping Point after that chastening experience.
That's fantastic. Okay, David, thank you. James, thank you. We'll meet sometime this year, I assume, once COVID settles down, and have maybe a 7-hour lunch this time, not an 8-hour lunch. Okay, guys, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheerio. Bye.